You have been told your whole life that if you just work hard enough, you will get ahead. 40 hours a week, 5 days, 52 weeks a year, for maybe 40 years. And somewhere along the way, you started believing that if you are still struggling, it must be your fault. You are not lazy. You are not bad with money. You are running a system that was never built to make you rich. It was built to keep you stable, productive, and just comfortable enough to keep showing up. If that sentence made something in your chest tighten, stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why and how to break out of it. Let us go back to where the 40-hour week actually came from, because almost nobody learns this part in school. In the early 1900s, the average worker put in 60 hours a week or more, sometimes 6 or 7 days straight, with no minimum wage and no overtime pay. Then, in 1914, Henry Ford did something that shocked the business world. He cut his workers to 8-hour days and doubled their pay to $5 a day. Competitors called it economic suicide, but Ford had noticed something simple. Tired workers made more mistakes and actually produced less per hour than rested ones. In 1926, Ford went further and moved his whole company to a 5-day, 40-hour week, and other manufacturers followed. Meanwhile, labor unions had been fighting for shorter hours since the 1860s, decades before Ford ever touched the idea. Historians are honest about this one. Ford gets the headline, but unions did the actual decades-long fight. That fight became law in 1938, when the Fair Labor Standards Act set the first federal minimum wage and required overtime pay. 2 years later, in 1940, the threshold dropped to 40 hours, and the modern workweek was officially born. So the 40-hour week was not a formula for building wealth. It was a compromise, designed to end brutal, exhausting labor conditions. It gave workers back their evenings, their weekends, their health. That was the entire goal: protect people, not make them rich. And it worked, for exactly what it was built to do. It gave millions of people rest, stability, and a floor to stand on. But here is the part almost nobody says out loud. A floor is not a ladder. The 40-hour week was never engineered around ownership, investing, or compounding wealth over time. It was engineered around trading a fixed number of hours for a fixed paycheck, week after week, decade after decade. For a while, that trade actually kept pace with the economy growing around it. From the late 1940s through the late 1970s, worker pay and worker output grew together. Then, starting around 1979, the two lines on the chart began to separate. This is not opinion. It shows up clearly in decades of Bureau of Labor Statistics and Economic Policy Institute data. Between 1979 and 2025, net productivity in the United States grew by roughly 90.2%, while typical worker pay grew by only about 33%. Output nearly doubled. Paychecks did not come close to keeping up. Productivity ran about 2.7 times faster than pay. Now, it is worth being fair here, because not every economist agrees on how big this gap really is. Some researchers argue that once you adjust for benefits and inflation differently, real compensation grew more than the popular chart suggests, and that debate is genuine. But almost nobody disputes the core pattern, and one number is very hard to argue with, either way. When the government first started tracking this in 1947, workers received about 70% of the nation's total income. By late 2025, that labor share had fallen to around 53.8%, one of the lowest levels in about 78 years. Less of the economy's growth is landing in paychecks, and more of it is landing somewhere else entirely. Meanwhile, the cost of an actual life did not sit still and wait for wages to catch up. Housing, healthcare, and childcare all climbed faster than the typical paycheck could absorb. This is why so many people feel like they are working just as hard as their parents did. but somehow falling further behind. You are not imagining that feeling. So if the 40-hour week was never built to make you wealthy, what actually does? Let us look at what the data shows about how people in America actually build wealth. There are roughly 24 million millionaire households in the United States today, close to 1 in every 11 adults. Most of them are not who you picture. They are not celebrities, founders, or trust fund heirs. According to Ramsey Solutions' national study of over 10,000 millionaires, 93% said hard work built their wealth, not a big salary. Only 31% averaged $100,000 a year across their entire career, and 1/3 never hit six figures in a single year. 2/3 of American millionaires never had what most people would call a high income. Their top occupations back this up too. Engineers, accountants, teachers, managers, and attorneys top the list, not Wall Street bankers. So it was not the size of the paycheck. It was what they did with it, and for how long. 8 out of 10 of these millionaires invested consistently in an employer retirement plan, most commonly a 401k, showing up automatically every pay period for decades. Wealth tends to show up when income gets redirected into something that grows on its own, even while you sleep. That is the one line worth remembering from this whole video. Research on self-made millionaires backs this up from a different angle. About 65% of them built 3 or more separate income streams before hitting their first million. Compare that to typical households, where the overwhelming majority depend on a single paycheck as their only source of income. One paycheck is not wrong, but it is fragile. If that one stream stops, everything stops with it. Federal Reserve data adds another layer here. Around 40% of households in the top 10% of wealth hold some form of business equity or ownership stake. In the bottom 10% of households by wealth, that number drops to about 2.5%. Ownership keeps showing up in the data as one of the clearest dividing lines in long-term wealth building. This is not about needing to quit your job and become a business owner overnight, so do not panic if that is not your path. Even among millionaires who relied mainly on career income, a clear pattern shows up. Around 40 to 45% built wealth the boring way: career income, maxed retirement contributions, and index fund investing over 25 to 30 years. No business exit, no real estate empire, no lucky break. Just time, consistency, and compounding doing the heavy lifting. Notice what is present in every single one of these paths: investing, ownership, and time in the market. Notice what is missing: working more hours at the same job for the same hourly rate. So why does this myth persist? The idea that working harder inside the system eventually creates wealth on its own. Partly because for a few decades right after World War II, it actually did work close to that way. Wages and productivity moved together, and one income could often support a household. That era shaped the advice our parents and grandparents passed down, and it was not wrong for its time. But the underlying economic engine changed, and a lot of that advice never got updated to match it. We are still teaching a 1950s playbook inside a 2026 economy, and the math simply does not close the same way anymore. This is not about blame, and it is not about which political party or which decade caused it. It is about understanding the actual mechanics of how income becomes wealth, so you can stop measuring yourself against a broken yardstick. If you have felt exhausted at 40 hours a week and still watched your savings barely move, that is not a character flaw. That is a structural gap between how the modern economy grows and how a single paycheck grows. So what actually closes that gap based on everything the data shows us? First, the 40-hour job is not the enemy. For most people, it is still the foundation, the starting capital that funds everything else. The shift happens in what you do with the income after it lands in your account. Millionaire research keeps circling back to one behavior more than any other: consistent investing, even in small amounts, sustained over long periods of time. Second, ownership matters, whether that is equity in a company you work for, shares in the market, or a small side business. You do not need to quit your job to start. You need to stop treating your paycheck as the entire plan. Third, time in the market beats timing the market. Almost every time this has been studied. The millionaires who built wealth through investing stayed patient through both bull and bear markets. Fourth, living below your means is not a punishment. It is the mechanism that actually funds every other step. 94% of millionaires in recent research said this single habit was the defining trait that separated them from high earners who stayed broke. High income does not guarantee wealth. What you keep and what you do with what you keep decides almost everything. This reframes the whole conversation because the 40-hour week was never lying to you about effort. It was just never designed to answer the question you were asking it to answer. It protected your time and your health from unlimited exploitation. And on that job, it succeeded completely. It was never built to compound your money, diversify your income, or hand you ownership of anything. That part was always a decision made outside the 40 hours. So the real question is not, why am I not further ahead after working so hard? The real question is, what percentage of my income is still only coming from trading my hours directly for dollars? If the answer is 100%, you are not doing anything wrong. You are just standing on the floor the system gave you. The next move is not working a 41st hour. It is building the first small stream that does not depend on your clock. That could be an employer match you are not fully using yet, your first index fund contribution, or even $20 a week automated into an account you never touch. None of this requires quitting your job, taking wild risks, or having a six-figure income to start. Every dataset we looked at today points to the same quiet, unglamorous truth. Consistency over decades beats intensity over years. You were never lazy for feeling exhausted by 40 hours a week and still not seeing progress. You were reading a system correctly. It was built for stability, not for wealth. And now you know the difference, and that knowledge is the actual advantage. If this video changed how you see your own paycheck, that is exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe for more breakdowns like this. No noise, just the truth about your money.